Hi guys, welcome to a quick tutorial on how to use table views. Now, table views are a very important piece of the iPhone app developers toolkit, and they're sort of a component that you'll see in a lot of applications. As a quick example, I've pulled up the Nike Plus application here in the iTunes App Store, and if you take a look at the screenshots that are available as part of this application, you'll notice something pretty interesting. In almost all of these screenshots, there is some kind of a table view. So you'll see here, you've got a couple different menu options. That's being listed as part of a table view. On this screen, you've got a list of all your friends and how much they've run. That's being listed as part of a table view. You've got this cheers section, which is also a table view. And then, of course, you've got a listing of all the runs you've recently made, which is also in a table view. And as different as these look, they're all using that same basic code underneath to set up the table views. So table views are a really important piece in the app development process. Now, as part of this particular tutorial, I want to show you an example of sort of the simplistic table view that we will be creating as sort of our starter to get us on the road to creating more and more complicated table views. So in this simplistic example, we're just going to create a table view that we see on screen. It has one section. Table views can actually have multiple sections. This will only have one. And then within that section are several different rows. You'll see here that in our example, we've got 3 different rows of data. And normally when you've got a row like this and it's got what we call a detailed disclosure indicator or a detailed disclosure button, typically it implies that when I tap this, it loads in some other information. So this being a very simplistic table view, it won't do that. It'll actually just display the rows on screen. So let's get started with the process of creating this particular simplistic application. So I've got Xcode open in the background, and what I'm going to do is create a brand new project. I'm going to call this File, and we're going to go to New Project, and this will open up a Xcode window for me with a couple different options. So here's what I've got on screen, and you'll notice that I'm being prompted by Xcode to select a template for my project, and you'll notice that I'm now under the iOS section and I've got application highlighted. When I click on application, it gives me a couple different template options. I'm actually going to select the single view application and then hit next, and it's now going to ask me what I'd like to name my product. So what I'm going to call this is, let's just say we're going to call this TableView, and we'll just leave it at that. And I'm also, of course, asked to put in a company identifier. This is actually automatically pre-filled for me by Xcode, but it's in what we call reverse domain notification. And you'll notice that all it really just means is, if you've got a website which is abccompany.com, Xcode will, based on certain things that you filled in when you first created or first set up Xcode, it'll automatically populate this in sort of a reverse format. So in my case, that's com.vishalkarup. And you'll also notice that there's an option for device family. Sometimes this will be set to universal. I would recommend, if you're following along for this tutorial, go ahead and set this to iPhone. You might also notice that the use storyboard option is checked in your case. Go ahead and uncheck that as well. Storyboard is a new feature that was added to Xcode, and while it's pretty cool, we won't be using it for this application because we want to keep this tutorial pretty simple. So you can uncheck that like I have and then hit next. It's not going to prompt you for a location to actually save this, and I'm just going to save this on my desktop and hit create, and it goes ahead and does that. So once it's finished creating the project, we actually see a couple different things on screen. You'll notice here that in the files inspector, we've got the name of our project, the folder it's created within that project, and then of course the 5 different files that are here, which is the app delegate, the view controller, and the view controller.nib file. Now we're going to start with the nib file, so let's go ahead and click on that, and that loads up what is now interface builder integrated into Xcode. Now our first step here is, of course, to drag a table view directly onto our view, and we can do that one of 2 ways. If you have the utility inspector open, which it should be, it'll appear here on the right hand side, and you'll notice that there is a list of objects that we can actually drag onto screen, and all I have to do is sort of scroll down and find the UI TableView. So that's right here. Now if you don't want to do that, one other option, so let me go back to the top, is I can always filter this by typing in UI TableView, and it'll filter that list to where I get a sort of a subset of what's available for me. Now, if for example you don't see this utility inspector, don't panic, because it just means it's probably hidden away. Now, if you look towards the top right-hand corner of Xcode, you'll notice that there's a couple different button options. There's one group of buttons called View, and the utility inspector is actually activated when this particular button within that view set is actually pressed down. So you'll notice that in my case it is pressed down, so if I were to press it again, that vanishes. And it's actually pretty useful to know that, because sometimes you'll have things disappear and you just need to know where to go reactivate them again. So if I were to press this, you'll notice it comes back, and I can now drag my UI TableView directly onto my view, and it settles down nice and easy. So that's what we want to do as our first step. Our sort of second step would be to tie this UI TableView's data source and delegate to files owner. So anytime you implement a table view, you actually have to also tie what's called the UI TableView data source and its delegate to a particular class. So you've got here, what we're going to do is actually just right click, and if you don't have a mouse that supports a right click, you can also do control click to bring up that same exact menu. And you'll notice that under outlets we've got two options. One's called data source and the other's called delegate. Now if I hover over the little circle that's next to data source, you'll notice it changes into a plus symbol. And what I'm going to do is now drag, just left click and drag this up to my files owner and let it go. And now you'll see that the data source is now tied to the files owner. Same thing with the delegate. I'm going to do the exact same steps tied to files owner, and we're all set. Our next step is actually to go to the viewcontroller.h file, which is our files owner, and explicitly state what we just did, which is that this particular class is going to act as the data source and delegate. So we do that by opening up a angle bracket right under this line where it says add interface, view controller, UI view controller, and we're going to open up an angle bracket and then start typing in UI TableView data source. And there it is. Hit enter, get that. Next would be to type in UI TableView delegate. We're going to go ahead and do that as well. There it is. And then we'll close these angle brackets. Right, so that's that done. And so we've promised to implement this class would have, we've promised that this class will have the UI TableView data source and delegate methods. So essentially what we're doing here is we are giving that TableView a means to populate itself. I'm also going to want to set up a nice easy way to populate our table view with some data, and the easiest way to actually do that is using an NS array. So to do that, what we're going to do is, of course, I added these brace brackets here so I can actually enter some code, and I am going to now type in NS array and then create an NS array object called let's say items. I'm going to call this items here. And now for me to be able to modify or read things from here, I need to also enable or set up the setter and getter properties. And in Objective-C, that is done using the add property and add synthesize commands. So I'm going to go add property, and then I'm going to say non-atomic retain, and then I'll just copy this particular line of code and paste it down here to complete that particular statement. Hit Command S to save, and then I'll jump over to the implementation file for this particular file, which is viewcontroller.m, and then I will go ahead and right under this at implementation statement, I'm going to say at synthesize, and then I will begin to type in the name of the NS array object, which was items, and you'll see that CodeSense knows what it is and immediately fills that in. Put in a semicolon and save it. Now you'll notice that there is a warning message being displayed, and if I click on this, it says incomplete implementation. In fact, if I were to click on this number 2, it'll say method in protocol not implemented. Well, what that is referring to is, you'll remember that if we go back to a header file, we specified that view controller, which is this file, will act as the data source and delegate for our table view. Well, when you say that something's going to act as the data source and delegate, it implies that you're also going to implement certain methods that are required for the data source. And so the reason Xcode's complaining in our implementation file is because we haven't implemented those methods. So let's go ahead and do that next. I am going to go all the way to the bottom of this file and put in what I call, or what's called, a pragma mark. And I'll talk about this for a brief moment real quick here. Pragma mark, and I'm going to call this TableView methods. All right. So what pragma marks are just a easy way for you to jump to the various methods that you're implementing in your code. So imagine you've written an application, and this application grows from version to version, and it gets a lot of code in some of these implementation files. Well, you might want an easy way to jump to a particular method. Say you've built this application, you added some new code, and something's funky, and you maybe want to jump back to a particular method that you added, and you want to take a look at the code that's part of that method. Well, instead of scrolling up and down through thousands of lines of code, what you can actually do is make use of these pragma marks and make use of a great setup that Xcode has, which is, if you were to look towards the top of this particular window, you'll notice that there is sort of a breadcrumb style navigation. You'll notice that it starts off with TableView, which is the name of the project that I created. Then it talks about TableView, which is a folder. This is the folder that Xcode created to place all the project files in. And then it says we're in the viewcontroller.m file, which we are, and then it says we're in this particular class. And if I were to actually click on this, you'll notice that it lists all the different methods here. So you'll notice also that there's sort of a demarcation here that says view lifecycle, and then there's a bunch of methods that appears under this. And then there's also one called TableView methods, but there's nothing underneath it just yet. This is the TableView methods pragma mark that I created, and it's just sort of like a divider to make it easier for you as a programmer to get to some of these methods. Now, if you look at the view lifecycle, that's actually this right here on screen that I've got selected. And you'll notice that it has all these different methods underneath it. So this is just a quick little tip, I guess a segue into when you're writing your code to maybe make use of pragma marks, and it'll make it easier for you as well as people that are actually working on different versions of your application. All right, so before we actually begin to implement some of the methods that we're supposed to as part of this table view, I want to do one more thing. I'm going to jump to this viewDidLoad method, and I am going to set up the NSArray object and fill it with some data. You remember we had actually set that up so that we could use that sort of as an easy way to load our table view with some data. So let's say we're going to set up the NSArray. And if you remember, we had called our NSArray object items, so I'm just going to go back and say type in items. Then I have to allocate some memory, which is done using the alloc method. Let's see here, NSArray, and type in alloc. So we're going to say allocate some memory for this NSArray, and then we are also going to need to initialize it. So we do that using an init with, and there's a couple different options here, but we're going to use the init with objects. And we'll type in enter, and then I'm going to go ahead and just close this out, the bracket, and then put in the semicolon. Now we do have to fill this in. Init with objects, of course, as the name implies, takes objects, and what we're going to use is an NSString object or a series of NSString objects. So what we're going to do is type in the @ symbol, put in the name of our NSString, or put in an NSString value in double quotes. We'll just say item1. Close this. I'm going to put in a couple more, so we'll do item1, let's see here, item2, and item3. And I missed a little quote here. Right, okay, so now we've got 3 items set up. We've essentially allocated some memory for our NSArray object called items, and we've initialized it with some data, namely these 3 NSString objects. Very good. So hit Command S so we can save our work, and then now I'm going to jump back down and I'm going to implement some of the required methods when you're working with table views. And I'm sure a lot of developers, as they work with table views more and more, remember some of these methods just off the top of their head, and they don't have to look up any kind of a reference to remember what methods are required for table views. But if you're starting out, it is good to know that there's a very easy way to find out exactly what is required. For the TableView data source, I'm going to jump back into the viewcontroller.h file, and what we're going to do is actually hover our mouse over this text that says UI TableView data source, and then press down the option key on your keyboard, and you'll notice that that initially changed into sort of a what looked like crosshairs, and then it eventually changes into what looks like a symbol for a hyperlink. So what I can actually do here is click on it, and it will open up a tooltip, and within this tooltip is lots of useful information, but the one piece that we're really looking for is this section called reference, and you'll notice it is also a hyperlink, and if I were to click this, it will open up the organizer window, and within the organizer it's going to load up for us the UI TableView data source protocol reference, and what that's going to tell us is actually some of the required methods that we need to implement to make our TableView work. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and it'll open up the organizer, and you see it nicely loads up the UI TableView data source protocol reference. There's actually another way to get to this. I'm going to go ahead and close the organizer window, and once again, if you look towards the top right hand corner of your Xcode window, you'll notice that there's a button called organizer. Well, if I click on this button, you'll notice that it loads up organizer again, and this time also it has loaded up the TableView data source protocol reference. And this is simply because while clicking this button or pressing down on it would have opened up the organizer, the last reference documentation that I looked at was this data source protocol reference. That is why we're seeing it by default. Normally you'd probably see something else, and you can actually search for this here by typing TableView and then essentially just searching for whatever documentation it is that you want to see. So we'll we're already on the documentation we want, and just to save time, we're actually going to go ahead and scroll down and take a look at some of these methods. Now I might have messed a few things up here because I typed in an incomplete string and hit enter accidentally. So now I've kind of jammed Xcode, and it's thinking before it's going to release this and let me actually start working again. So let's see here. That was probably a unnecessary mistake, but we'll see here. Okay, so here we go. You'll see that it's loaded up some stuff here, and if we were really looking for a TableView reference, we can actually get to it using this search. Now I'm going to jump back down, and I'm going to take a look at some of the tasks that you have to perform when you're using TableView, and you'll notice that there's actually quite a few, but only 2 of them are listed as being required. And the one we're going to implement first is going to be this number of rows in section. So let's click on it, and it'll tell us a little bit about what this actually does. It says it tells the data source to return the number of rows in a given section of a table view. Now remember, in our example, in our sample app, we're only going to be using one section, but we still need to know the number of rows in that section. So to implement this, I'm just going to highlight this code, which is the actual name of the method, do a Command-C to copy it, and then I'll jump back to my viewcontroller.m file, and under this pragma mark that we created, we're going to just do a Command-V to paste it, and then we'll add the brackets so we can actually add the code, and do a Command-S to save. Now what it's looking for here, of course, is a value that tells Objective-C how many rows are going to be in this section for our table view. Now I could very easily just do something like return, and if you remember, we entered 3 and a string values, so I could do technically a return 3, and that would essentially satisfy that requirement. But what happens if we continue to add more and a string values to our array here? Well, I'd have to keep coming back and remember to actually update this value so it knew that there were more than 3 rows. Instead, what might be better is if we could somehow tell Objective-C to just take a look at the array itself and make a determination as to how many values have been entered into that array, and then basically use that count. And it turns out it's very easy to actually do this. So let's just delete the 3. And what I can do instead is just return a count of the values in my NSArray object. So you'll remember that our NSArray object is called items. So I'm just going to start typing in items, and see code sense finds that. And then I'm going to put a dot, and then I'm going to return the count property. So we'll say items.count, do a Command-S to save it. Now that's one of the methods that was required. If you remember, within Organizer there was actually a second method that was needed. So what we'll do is we'll scroll back up, and then go back to the section that's called tasks, and you'll see here that there is another method. It's called TableView self-row at index path. This is also required, and we're going to have to implement this. So let's go ahead and click on that. Once again, it tells us what this is actually going to do. It asks the data source for a cell to insert in a particular location of the table view. So we go ahead and copy this, do Command C, come back into our file, do a Command V to paste it, and let's put in the brackets so we can actually add some code, do a Command S just to save that value. Right, so what this method's actually going to do is it's going to draw or allocate memory for the cells that appear within a table view's rows. And there are a couple different steps that you need to pay attention to when you're creating these. So let's before we jump into writing any code for this, let me actually bring back the simulator so you can kind of see what we're trying to do here. So in this simulator, you're going to see that this is a different application that I actually loaded up that I previously written, and you'll notice for one, in this table view that we see on the screen, there are multiple rows, and I believe there's about 10 rows that appear here. Now what happens in our application, we actually have just 3 rows of data, but what happens if we've got 20 or maybe 200 different rows? We don't want to be in a position where we're actually allocating memory to 200 rows, even though the user can only see 10 rows at a time. A much smarter way would be if we could in some way draw these 10 rows, and then every time a row rolls off the screen, we may basically just reuse that cell, that memory that we allocated, for another row. And that's essentially what we're going to try to do right here. So we've got multiple steps, and let me hide this again. We've got multiple steps that we're going to perform. So first is step 1. In step 1, what we're going to try and do is we're going to tell Objective-C to kind of take a look at the table view and see if there are any cells that it can reuse. So let's just say check to see if we can reuse a cell from a row that has just rolled off the screen. And the way we do that is first we declare a UI TableView cell. We'll just go ahead and call it cell, right? And then we're going to tell it this cell should be set up. We're going to say TableView. We're going to say DQ reusable cell with identifier. And we have to give it each cell has to have a identifier, and so we're going to say if there is a cell that's available because the row that contains that cell has rolled off the screen, go ahead and reuse it. And the way you can tell is using this NSString value, which is the identifier associated with the cell. So we're going to set this to be just some arbitrary text. I'm going to call it cell as well, and we're going to go ahead and close this up. Now this will start to make a little bit more sense once we start to implement the rest of this code. So as step 2, what happens if there isn't really a cell for it to be able to reuse? In that case, we have to create a new cell. So let's just say if there are no cells to reuse, create a new one. So we go now and say if cell equals nil, then what we want you to do is create a new cell. We say cell, and we're going to say UI TableView cell alloc to allocate the memory for it, and then we're also going to initialize it. And you'll notice that it's Xcode's code sense is very good about quickly filling in the rest for you. So we want this init with style UI TableView style method. So we're going to go ahead and call that, and over here we have to define what the TableView style is going to be, and so you just start with UI TableView cell style, and you'll notice that it gives us a couple different options. We'll just pick the first one for simplicity. We'll say default, and it's going to ask us, well, what's the reuse identifier for the cell? And here's where we get to specify a value. So we're going to, again, it's expecting an NS string, so we're just going to call it cell, and we'll go ahead and close this, semicolon to save it. So here's where we're actually defining a reuse identifier when we draw a cell, and this is exactly the same as, if you remember, initially we had said what is the when we're reusing a cell, what's the identifier we want to use? So you'll notice that this is set to cell, as is this, and these two really just need to match so that you can reuse the cells and be more, have more optimized code. Next, we may want to add, a detail view accessory, for example. And if you remember, these were the little arrows that appear to the right. So let me bring back the simulator. And what we're doing next is adding these little arrows. We don't have to, but in this case, we're going to go ahead and add it just so you can see the complete process. So we'll add a detail view accessory. And the way we do that is we type in cell, which is our UI TableView cell object. And we're going to say we want to access its accessory type, and we're going to set that to UI TableView cell accessory. And let's just see, what do we want to pick here? Let's go ahead and pick just the first one, which is the detail disclosure button. We can also pick the detail disclosure indicator if we wanted to. We'll just pick the button in this case because it's that nice blue button, and that's all we need to do there. And we'll hit the semicolon. Next, we also need to populate our cells with some text. And if you remember, what we really want to do here in part of step 3 is populate our cell with the text that we had set up as part of our NS array. Now, the easiest way to do that is, of course, just again, we're going to use cell, which is our UI TableView cell object. We're going to access a property called text label. You'll see it's right there, and it has a text value that we can set. So we're going to set that, and we are going to actually just set this to, like I said, the value that Objective-C is currently looking at within our NS array. Now, our NS array, of course, was called items, so let's just type that in, items, and then we can say we want you to set the value of cell.textlabel.text to the essentially to whatever you're looking at right now in the NS array object. So we do that by saying items object.index, and then we have to provide it an NS unsigned integer, and so we do that by saying object.index, and here we can just say it's index path, which is an NS index path.row. By doing this, what we're telling Xcode or Objective-C is to take a look at the at whatever the NS string value is that we're currently looking at, and then setting that to the actual textlabel.text property. Last but not least, step 4, we actually want to just return the row, right? And so by doing that, what we can do, or really it's returning the cell, but so let's just update that. We'll do return cell and semicolon and finish that up. And you'll notice that as soon as I hit Command S, all our warnings disappear. That's because even though I had initially said that there are certain methods that need to be implemented with a TableView and data source and a delegate protocol, it's for a simple application like ours, we really just need to implement the data source required methods. Now, just for best practice purposes, let's also take a look at the delegate protocol reference. And again, if you remember, all I need to do is go over to my viewcontroller.h file, hover over UI TableView delegate, press down the option key and wait for this to become a hyperlink, and then just click on it, and then I get the tooltip, and then I can again within the tooltip click on the reference and bring that up. Right, so we're now in the UI TableView delegate protocol reference, and again I'm just going to scroll down and take a look at the tasks, and you'll notice that there are several tasks just like we saw with the data source, but there is not a notation next to any one of them that says it's required. So because we have a simplistic application, we really don't have to implement anything else here, and we can actually just close the organizer window, and we can then go ahead and simply run our application. So we can do run by either clicking the button here or just hitting Command R. I'm just going to go ahead and click the button and wait for Xcode to compile everything up and then give us our finished product in the simulator. So this is going to take a couple seconds. I do have several applications open, and so here it's going to attempt to run it in the simulator, and it's coming up on my screen, and I will pull this over in just 1 second. So here we are. So just wait for this to actually load up the application, and here we go. We've got our table view finally coming up, and here we have our items 1, 2, 3. We've got our detailed disclosure indicator as well. So that's how you can go ahead and create a very simple table view application. In our subsequent tutorials, we'll probably build on this knowledge. We won't go back into how to create these basic table views, and we'll modify this to do some more cool stuff, like adding images to the left-hand side. There are different detailed disclosure indicators that you can use as well. So thank you for watching. I hope this was of some use to folks that are getting started with using table views. They really are a very powerful tool, and hopefully this tutorial will help you get started on that road. Thanks.